Yeah, you mentioned or you alluded to earlier a little about the idea of unbalanced enforcement of laws in certain communities or what have you. Eric Holder, the Attorney General, is making a push now to kind of change some of that in terms of mandatory sentencing for drug cases. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so well, there's unequal enforcement of laws, but there's also just the draconian sentencing guidelines. I think even more interesting in this city that is connected to that than what Holder said is what the new chief judge for the Northern District of Illinois said. He's a federal judge. He's the chief judge for the federal courts here. His name is Ruben Castillo. He's the first Latino judge. And he recognized that in the Northern District of Illinois, there was these series of cases over the last decade where they basically entrapped people to think that they were robbing a drug house. But entrapment didn't apply as a defense because usually they targeted people who already had criminal histories. He noticed, and this just came out, in the last couple of months, he noticed that 100% of all the defendants that had come before him had either been black or Latino. These were people who had not come up with a crime idea themselves. The DEA suggested the crime to them. They bought into it. And this goes right along, I think, with where your topic's going later in terms of why there's problems with giving the NSA power. And this goes along with what Holder's doing. It's not just that there is draconian mandatory minimums on drug cases. It's that you have a DEA who, from all appearances, has been targeting certain people. So only those people get impacted by those draconian by those draconian mandatory minimums. You already had the issue that's been dealt with extensively over the last few years about the difference between the mandatory minimums for cocaine and for powder cocaine and crack cocaine, and the difference in terms of those quantities. And the Sentencing Commission in Congress is slowly but surely dealing with those. But when you have targeted enforcement, that's exacerbated by mandatory minimums.
Interesting that you bring up, and I did want to get into the Snowden case and the whistleblowers. Here we have a situation where a former NSA employee becomes disgruntled, gathers a bunch of documents when he leaves, and leaks them to the press and flees the country. Some people feel that he's a hero. Some people feel that he's a traitor. I wonder, looking at it from a legal standpoint, what is the pro and the con of what happened here?
Well, before I talk about whether he's the legal standpoint from him, what just recently came out, and the reason I think there's a connection, is what recently came out a week or two ago was that the NSA was taking these recorded conversations and not only using them to prevent terrorism, they were passing them on to the DEA for drug cases. So the danger of giving this type of power, which hasn't been talked about enough, is that people then use it for a variety of other things. They have information not only about who's dealing drugs, but they presumably have information about which politician is sleeping around, or which politician is using Viagra, or which politician is gambling, and that's a bunch of power to give to somebody, or to what sound like 2 to 3 million people.
Welcome back to 26 North Halstead, talking with Brendan Shiller, civil rights attorney, about the issues of the day. We're talking about the Snowden whistleblower, NSA whistleblowers, and a lot of people I've talked to about this are apathetic and don't think it's a big deal. If I'm not committing a crime, why should I even be concerned about them going through my emails?
Okay, so again, the legal part about whether he's a whistleblower or a spy or whatever, I don't necessarily have a thought on. Politically, I think he's a whistleblower. And politically, I think this is a huge deal. And it's for two reasons. Two reasons that statement is really fallacious. When you say, I'm not doing anything wrong, why do I care? There's two huge problems with that statement. First off, you don't have to be doing anything wrong to want to have secrets. Everybody has secrets. And you don't want people knowing everything you're doing for a variety of reasons, whether it's because you're throwing a surprise birthday party for your wife or anything else. You don't have to be doing stuff wrong to have secrets. But more importantly, the issue isn't what you do and whether people know about what you do. The issue is the power that information provides to the select few that has it. So people who are gathering this information aren't necessarily concerned about you, but they're concerned about everybody else who may want power and getting as much dirt on those people who may want power.
And everyone's focused on dirt because it's very sexy in the headlines. It sells newspapers, it sells news shows. But I mean, like you said, it could be something as, I've developed a proprietary recipe for something that's a multi-million-dollar business deal that I'm not ready to launch, and it could hamper my entire business if this gets out to the competition.
If you have a new innovative idea and you send it to me as your lawyer to write via email, to write a non-disclosure agreement, and you send it to a scientist to work out some things, and you're 3 years away, and somebody, one of these 2 or 3 million people who are collecting information, gets that information, has the power to blackmail you. I'll release it to somebody else within the next 2 or 3 years. That's problematic. There's all sorts of scenarios, and that's a perfect scenario because that gets to the heart of capitalism. But there's all sorts of scenarios that are very benign where you're just turning over power when you release privacy to what sounds like 2 to 3 million people within the military-industrial complex who has some type of access to your emails and phone calls.
Well, what is the alternative? Because the argument is being made that, look, we're trying to stop the boogeyman here. There are people out there, whether you want to believe it or not, there are people who want to destroy the United States of America. At least my belief, there are evil people in the world, whether they're internal or external. There are evil people out here, and something has to be done to try and curtail their efforts as well.
See, that argument's made always on all types of law enforcement. It's the same argument that's made on stop and frisk in a different context. It's the same argument that's made on mandatory minimums for drug sentencing in different contexts. It's the same argument that's made on the parallel construction that allows you to hide where you get evidence from. And the problem with all those arguments is not only are they unconstitutional, not only is the damage greater than the benefit, but in all likelihood, most of the time, there isn't the benefit that's argued. Just like there isn't the benefit that's argued for stop and frisk, there isn't the benefit that's argued for mandatory minimums. Such intrusive activity actually does not create the benefit.
Would it make you feel better about the whole situation if the State Department said, okay, we're going to list the 22 potential terrorist acts that we have interrupted in detail so you can see that our efforts were worthwhile? Would that make you feel more comfortable?
No, we're not making me feel more comfortable because, one, we don't know the tie, and the purpose of the Constitution and these checks and balances is because you're expected not to trust people in power and government in power. I trust Obama more than I trust Bush, but I don't trust Obama. What would make me feel better is if they followed the Constitution, if they had some of the things Obama suggests in terms of real oversight, maybe an actual advocate for privacy. Some of those things would make me feel better. Actual real checks and balances that prevent them from just doing fishing expeditions and gathering all sorts of data on everybody in the country. Some real checks and balances is what would convince me. Anything about how we prevent this or we stop that, I don't care about.